Assalamualaikum and good morning to Madam Asha. My name is ADIL bin Muhammad ANUAR. My metric number is Q3DBT20F1016. So now I'm going to do an experiment of fermentation of yeast and sugar. So this is the material and the apparatus that we use for this experiment. First we have water, a cup of measuring spoon. We have sugar, brown sugar and yeast, and we use tablespoon and teaspoon, and we have 4 different amount of sugar and different substrate of sugar for the experiment, and we use ruler for the thickness of the fermentation process. Okay, so the first step is we put 1 tablespoon of sugar into the ziploc bag and 1 tablespoon of yeast into the ziploc bag, and then we add cup of water to the ziploc bag. And then, so make sure to remove excess air. So mix and shake the yeast and the sugar, and make sure the sugar and the yeast is dissolved completely. Okay. So after we shake and dissolve the yeast and the sugar, we will measure the thickness of the bag. So here, let's put in the table. So the thickness of the ziploc bag is 1.3. So next I will do for 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. So we use a different types of sugar because we want to observe if there is a different result if we use a different sugar. So just put 1 tablespoon of yeast and then a cup of water. So as you know, fermentation, yeast needs sugar for the fermentation process. Sugar acts as the food of the yeast. So now we'll just mix all the mixture, yeast and sugar, until it will dissolve. So we need to let the fermentation occur for 5 minutes and above. So as you can see, I have done 4 types of fermentation. There is 1 teaspoon of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. So we need to observe the thickness of the ziploc bag. So as you can see here, the video of the fermentation process. So the very front of the ziploc bag is 1 tablespoon of white sugar, continue with 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and continue with 1 teaspoon of sugar, and at the bottom here is 1 teaspoon of brown sugar. So for the fermentation process, when we add water, yeast and sugar, we will get carbon dioxide and alcohol. So for the very front of the ziploc bag is, we can see the bubble forming is rapidly. So as you can see here, for 1 tablespoon of sugar, the fermentation is successfully occurred. And for the 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, the fermentation is about less effective. This is because brown sugar is hard to break down. And for 1 teaspoon of sugar, the fermentation also less effective, and for 1 tablespoon of brown sugar also not effective, because less sugar also make the fermentation slow down. As 1 tablespoon of sugar. So now we will measure the thickness of the 1 tablespoon of sugar. So as you can see, the thickness of the 1 tablespoon of sugar is 6 centimeter. Okay, so for 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, the thickness is 3.5 centimeter. And then for 1 teaspoon of sugar, the thickness is 2.8 centimeter. And for 1 teaspoon of brown sugar, the thickness is about 3 centimeter. So this happened because for fermentation, the amount of sugar needs for 1 tablespoon is just perfect for the fermentation process. And for the brown sugar, that is less effective because brown sugar is hard to control for the fermentation process. So the experiment of fermentation of yeast and water is successfully achieved.